Good morning, everybody. Hope everybody's doing well today. Give me a sec just to get everything set up here. The microphone, there we go. All right, I'll turn that down a little bit. Perfect. How's everybody doing today? Welcome, Jen, Richard, Ray. Good to see you guys. Raul, Tyler, my man. I love how you're always here, man. You don't miss.
Hey,
love it.
Keep providing that great content. I can't not show up.
Oh, dude, you're too kind, man. Appreciate that, brother. Yeah, man. We'll hopefully today will be a good one. I'm excited to talk about this one. This is near and dear to my heart. You know, I've got started my career in buyers and buyer lead generation, and so I've worked with a lot of buyers over the last 5 years. And even before that, you know, my background was new home sales, and I had done that for about 5 years before I got into general real estate. And so all I did at that point was work with buyers. A little bit different process there, but it's, you know, still all that. So I love working with buyers. You know, I love the excitement that they get buying a new home. And so this is going to be a good call, I think, today. So hopefully everybody will get some value out of it. I'm going to share my process. But I'm open to hearing everybody's processes, and you know, and if they've got little, you know, intricate things that, you know, tie into what we do, but maybe they're doing it a little bit different. You know, that's what I'm excited to hear about. So, all right, I'm going to stream this real quick. Let's see if I can figure this out. Stream this to Facebook. Let's see. Give me 1 second, guys. Live on Facebook. All right, let's share it on there. All right, cool. Okay, fetching, perfect. All right. Here we go. All right, it's going. There we go. All right, guys. Well, it looks like we are now live on Facebook and live on Zoom. So welcome to the Monday Mastermind call, everybody. It's good to see everyone. And we still got some people joining today. So excited to have everybody here. Just as a quick overview of what we're going to be covering today is the buyer-client process. And so, you know, this call, it's pretty tailored, I would say, specifically to real estate agents for this particular call today. But we're going to be talking all about once you get a buyer client, what your process looks like to get them all the way from, you know, them signing up to be your client all the way to the closing table. And then even beyond that, what you do for them. And so this isn't really related to getting buyer clients. We've done other trainings and other Monday masterminds built around how do you generate buyer leads and, you know, that kind of process of getting them to even the point where they're going to start to work with you. But today we're going to be starting off from the point that now, hey, they've agreed to meet with you, you know, do a consultation, go look at a house, whatever that might be. But like whatever that process is, starting from that point and moving forward all the way to getting them to closing. So that's what this call is about. Again, we're streaming live right now on Facebook. So I'm going to be kind of monitoring the chat there on Facebook as well as Zoom. So if you guys have questions or if you want to contribute anything to the call, feel free to either put it into the chat box here on Zoom or put it into the comment section on Facebook, and I'll try and monitor both of these areas. So, but and then feel free, if you're on the Zoom call too, you're feel free to raise your hand. That way I can call on you if you've got something you want to say and you don't want to put it into the chat. So that being said, let me make sure here I've got my Facebook pulled up so I can see the comments. All right. Perfect. There we go. All right. Good morning, my mom, Stacy Jill Handy. Good morning on Facebook. And it looks like we got a lot of people here on Zoom. So excited. All right, guys. Well, let's kick it off. No time to waste. So as far as what I kind of want to start with, as far as talking about the home buying process, basically, again, we're starting from the point that, you've either, established communication with this person and now they've called you back or something along those lines. And they're like, all right, hey, we're ready to go. Like, what do you start with? What do you do? And just so we can get the juices flowing and everybody kind of thinking about some stuff, I'll start with what I do. And I've kind of come up with this process over the last 5 years. I won't say 100% every single time. It just kind of depends too on like where this lead is coming from, where they're at already in their home buying process themselves. But in general, what I normally will do is on all occasions, we'll kind of, talk to them, figure out their situation, and then start with, hey, have you thought about pre-approval yet? Have you gotten pre-approved, or is that something that's, on your mind? Because here's the thing, guys. I mean, when you're first starting out in real estate, you're probably willing to work with just about anybody just because you want the business. But as you start to, advance and progress your career, you'll start to see, your time is pretty valuable. And you got to pick and choose. You can't just go off of a whim for anybody that wants to, work with you. And so, one of the biggest clear ways to find out if somebody's, pretty serious or not, is if they're willing to take that step of talking to a lender, or at least be willing to do that. And so, I always say like, hey, are you comfortable, meeting with a lender or talking to my lender? And if they've already got a lender, that's fine. I don't pressure them or tell them they got to use mine, but I just want to make sure that they're at least comfortable doing that or they've already done it. And so, that's the case. A lot of times what ends up happening is if they aren't willing to do, meet with a lender, or they're a little hesitant about it, 9 times out of 10, those people don't end up buying. And I've just realized that over the years, for some reason or another, it's a time suck at that point. But sometimes it's worth it to take it, especially when you're newer into the business, because you might be that 1 or 2 times out of 10 that you get that business and it's worth it for you. For me, like I say, there's a lot of things that I've got to spend my time doing. So like, that's a pretty cut and dry thing. Like, hey, you got to be willing to talk to this person, or you're already talking to your own. So that's the first thing that's part of my process. And if they say they're willing, then at that point, I just, connect with my lender and I give them my buyer client's information. I do not give my buyer client the information to my lender and expect them to reach out or call them, because that usually, sometimes that happens, sometimes it doesn't. Whereas if I give my lender my buyer client's information, of course, that's where I've already asked permission from my buyer client, say, hey, the first step in the process is this. Are you comfortable if I, give your information to my lender to reach out to you? And they say, yeah, sure, that's fine. And so then they reach out. The onus is on the lender to, do all the follow-up. And I don't at that point, I don't even really have to think about it anymore. I can just move on to the next step, which is to, set up that first meeting with them. Because I want to be face-to-face with the person. I want to start providing value to that buyer client right away. And so even if they don't have the pre-approval back, I don't want, people to misunderstand what I'm saying, that they got to have a pre-approval for me to go meet with them. I will go meet with people before they get a pre-approval. I just want to know, though, that they're willing to meet or talk to a lender. Because a lot of times if they're like sketchy about it or whatever, that's usually a pretty sign that either they're not really that committed to this decision that they're about to make of buying a home, or there's something there that's probably going to stop them that they're afraid of. And, it's going to stop the whole sale altogether anyways. And so both of those scenarios are not good. So anyways, that's where I started out at is doing the, setting up that meeting, and basically the way that I kind of account for my meetings is, I try and tailor it around going and seeing properties. That's what buyers want. They want to go look at homes. So I'm not going to stop that process. I always will go do one tour. I call it, a home tour, where we'll see 3 to 5 properties. And that's even if they don't have a pre-approval yet. I'll do one of those. I won't do multiple. I'll tell them, hey, if we go for that first tour, and they don't have the pre-approval yet, that's fine. But then anytime beyond that, if we're going to go see homes again, at that point, they need to go get a pre-approval letter, or they, talk to the lender, talk to my lender, talk to their lender, something at that point to go see a second tour. So, but we'll go out, and usually I account for about 3 hours for this, first presentation to take place. We've got a question coming in. How much time do you give then between providing the lender with their info and going to look at homes? Like I say, Latrice, that first tour that I go on, it can be right away. Like, I'm not saying, like, if they called me up, say there's a lead, they call me up and say, hey, I want to go look at, 123 Main Street. I say, okay, I still ask them about, hey, pre-approval, are you willing? Are you allowing of my lender to call you? And if they say yes at that point, even if they haven't gotten the pre-approval yet, I'll still go show them that first tour. I'm just not going to do a second one until they've, had some kind of, they put out their application, they've met with them, they've done something to show that they are, more serious about getting pre-approved and this process. And so, yeah, that's kind of how that works. Like, and that's usually how it happens, right? Buyers, they, see a house that they really want to see and they want to go see it that day. And at least in my market in San Antonio, they need to go see it that day or else it might be off the market, right? And I kind of use that as also kind of part of the strategy of getting the pre-approval letter done. Is I say, hey, look, if this property is that exciting to you, chances are it's going to be, gone because it's going to be exciting to a lot of people, and it is a good deal. I'll look it up and say, like, that house is very nice. It's only been on the market one day. They're probably going to get offers. So one of the things I would suggest is that you allow my lender to give you a call, get that process moving, because if you do in fact like this home, when we go see it, we're not going to be able to make an offer, or at least a strong offer without having that pre-approval letter done. And sometimes that can take a day or two to get that back. So we need to start that right now as we're talking. Like, that's the next thing that you need to do. We'll go set up the showing, even though you haven't done that, but that needs to be done. And if they're good with all that stuff, that's usually a pretty good sign. If there's something along the way that's, a little, it just gives a little bit of a red flag and you just need to be aware of it. But I'm not saying don't go show that first house. So now let's say you set up that showing and you're going to go, do a tour, right? 3 to 5 homes is what I recommend on the first tour. Even if they send you one specific property, I think that, it's almost a waste of my time to go show them one house. You're not going to gain a lot of insight from that client just going and showing them one house at a time. It's just, because you figure in that scenario, your drive time is going to take more than it's worth. Just, you're going to spend 30 minutes driving to the house, 30 minutes driving back, and then 30 minutes showing the house. Whereas, like, if you see 3 to 5, one, I think you're almost providing more value to that client, because it's like, hey, you send me the one house that you like. Now I'll go in the MLS and I'll try and match up 3 or 4 more houses that are similar to it, that, I've identified that, we can go see. Or I just kind of, coach them up and say, hey, look, to get the most amount of time value out of our time, I think, yes, we'll definitely go see that one. But also, would you mind sending me 2 or 3 others? They might not be as high up on your list as that one, but just send me 2 or 3 others. We're going to set those up at the same time too, just so we can maximize our time. I can start to really identify, like, things that you like in the home versus things you may not want. It'll help me that way if this house is not the house for you, or if, this house goes under contract before we can get to it, it'll help me, down the road to better identify properties that you are going to like. And so I kind of, again, make it about them, right? Tell them why it's a benefit to go see more than one house. And then we go from there. So, I mean, that's what I do. I set up a tour, 3 to 5 homes that we're going to go see. And when I figure out, like, what part of town it is that we're going to go see those homes at, I'll set up and I tell them, hey, part of the process is we need to meet at, a Starbucks or a local coffee near wherever that first house is going to be. And I say, we're going to sit down just so I can kind of explain more in detail about the process with you. And if nothing else, even if you don't end up buying a house right now, you're going to gain some knowledge that I think is going to be valuable to you, for when you are ready, to buy. And so I kind of, again, make it about them, right? Tell them the benefit to them, right? We're going to explain the process. We're going to explain how it works. And then at that 30-minute consultation is kind of what I call it when I go to the coffee shop. I'm bringing the buyer's representation agreement and IABS form. And that way you can sit down. It's not inside the house. I'll usually offer to buy them coffee. I try and get there, 15 minutes ahead of time. So I'm the first one to show up versus them being the first one to show up. And then, I offer to get them a coffee, get them a drink, say, hey, I love to meet you. This is great meeting you. And start up that relationship on the right foot. And then, we sit down. I bring a little buyer packet with me. And I think, that's something we can kind of talk about here too. And again, guys, I'm just rattling this all off. If as I'm saying stuff, you're having questions, feel free to put it in the chat. It looks like right now on Zoom, we're good. We don't have anything going on in the chat yet. Let me make sure on Facebook I haven't skipped too far ahead. Oh, good morning, Karen, Trent, Teresa. Good morning, all you guys. All right, good. We're good on Facebook too. So But as far as the buyer consultation and the documentation and stuff like that I bring with me there, I bring two things. Well, I guess technically it's three, right? I bring the stuff that I need to get signed, the IABS and the buyer's rep form, right? I bring that with me. That's one thing. I bring the sheets for the properties that we're going to go list. It's like a little, all the MLS sheets, right? Like I'll bring the public custom, is what they call it in my MLS view of that listing. So like it, has just the details of the properties that we're going to go see. And, and that's the second kind of part of it. And then the third part is my buyer kind of presentation, my buyer package that I give to them. And in that buyer package, it's pretty simple. I mean, I've got like little sheets for each of them. One is about me, talks about, who I am as a real estate agent, what I've done, kind of that stuff. And then I've got something about my company, right, in my brokerage and like the value there and, a little bit of background about that. I've got a roadmap of the process, the actual home buying process, from start to finish, talking about getting pre-approved, talking about going and showing stuff, talking about getting under contract, the inspection. It's just a general overview of the whole contract. And next, I've got a little document that talks about pre-approval and the importance of it, and then the difference between a pre-approval and a pre-qualification, and and how to get that going. I've got a document in there that talks about the home searching process and how they can best utilize their time to link up with my time and be the most efficient way to schedule showings and to look for searching, like what websites should they be looking on, what things should they be aware of when they're searching. Like it's just like a document that has kind of best practices stuff as realtors we should know, but maybe the clients might not know. Like, clients that, they constantly look at homes that are 240 days on market and they wonder why when we get to the home, they don't like it, and it doesn't look like the pictures. It's like, look, it's just stuff like that. Like we know if you're looking at a house that's been on the market for 6 months and it's not been purchased, like usually there's something wrong with the property unless they just recently lowered the price or something. But if it's a stale listing, like I tell them, like, I don't think that's going to be efficient use of our time, but I mean, not saying that we won't do it, but I just kind of make them aware of some of this stuff, right? Like look for homes that have just been recently listed or just reduced or, all that kind of stuff, like is just how to search for homes. I have a document in there about that. Making an offer. I have a little document that talks about, the best practices for making an offer and, what they need to be aware of, how they can strengthen their offer. Like if it's a new listing and it's just recently on the market, like what they can probably expect as far as an offer. Like, are they thinking they're going to get 10 grand off of a $200,000 home if it's just been listed for a day? Probably not, right? And I kind of just make people aware, like, hey, if it just is listed, you're probably not going to get, that much off, if any. And in fact, it might even go for above listing if it's, multiple offers versus I say, if it has been on the market a while longer, we might have more power there. So, it's just a little bit of a deal about making an offer and some best practices they got to think about there. Tips for offer acceptance. That again is part of the making an offer deal. Cost breakdown. So I like to break down the cost and what's going to be expected out of them when the time comes to buy a home. So like, for instance, they're going to need option money. They're going to need earnest money. They're going to need money for inspection. They're potentially going to need money for appraisal, for HOA stuff. I just kind of put all the things that they could need. And then of course I talk about, the closing and, the rest of the money is going to be due at that point. I do also put in there a little bit about the difference with, asking for seller contributions and the value of that versus like just asking for price off of the house. I like to set these expectations up front just so that way they're aware of it and I'm providing them value right off the go. So I have a little, and when I'm giving them these documents, it's just so I don't forget, right? Plus it's also a way that they can take something home with them. So, because they're going to probably forget 90% of what you say at that meeting. But if you give them something to take with them, they can go back and read it and remember it. So that's why I have all that. And then of course I talk about closing day and just kind of like the closing process and what they need to be aware of, like making sure they know not to go out and buy a car right away, before closing, not to go buy their furniture and put it on their credit. That simple stuff that, we kind of take for granted sometimes. We talk about moving day and like not setting up, movers to show up the morning of your closing day because, likely it's going to take funding, which, is 4 to 5 hours. Sometimes, can be up to that much. So, we don't want them having movers showing up the day before, the morning of their closing. And we talk about, the final walkthrough and just, all that kind of stuff that comes with that. So that's in the closing day package. Now, I don't, I might not necessarily go over every single piece of it just because, again, we're trying to do this meeting in 30 to 45 minutes. And literally, if you're going over it line by line, there's a lot of stuff, like even just what I talked about right now. If you go over all that stuff with a new buyer, because they're going to have questions when you're talking to them, I mean, that could last an hour or more. So I'm kind of telling them most of the time, like, hey, I'm just going to give you an overview of all this. Like, I'm going to give these things for you to take home so you can look at it more in detail at home. And if you got more questions, you can let me know. I really just want to kind of give this to you and just hit the highlights and get through this in 30 minutes so we can go see those properties that you're, wanting to see. And so that's kind of how I handle that. So I don't have to go into detail about everything. And then, of course, it's different too. Like if you're meeting with somebody who's bought 5 homes before, like you probably don't need to do all that, right? Like you're not going to go over all that stuff. They know how to do it. Like this is like if they're, first time buyer, or maybe they're a first time buyer with you, you might just need to go over some specifics that's, a little bit different about your process. But that's it, like if they've bought homes before, you're just kind of telling them about your process and maybe some things that they need to be aware of. And then some things you're just going to hit on a lot lighter than you would if it was, a first time buyer total. So anyways, that's kind of how that works. Now let's kind of take the process of, all right, so you're now out showing them homes, right? Like you're going to go show them 3 to 5 homes. When I'm out showing people homes, the one thing that I've picked up on, and I do this now all the time, I think it's a pretty good way to get people to think about it. And it helps me kind of identify really what people think about homes is I just have them, grade the house on a scale of 1 to 10 at the end of every single showing. And they can write it down if they're like a note taker. I've given them that package of the homes that we're going to see. So sometimes they'll take notes, sometimes they won't. But at least in my mind, I can kind of rank like where they like. And a lot of times I tell people like, hey, if a home is a 9, that means that like we're putting in an offer because very few homes are ever going to be a 10. And I just like try and explain that up front that, I've done this for a long time that, chances are we're not going to find a 10 home, like no home is perfect. But if you find a 9 out of 10, like that's, something that you should be strongly considering making an offer and buying. And so I kind of like set the ground rules so they know what that scale means. And then, like I say, now, then I'll get a lot of times that a house will be a 3, it'll be a 6, it'll be a 7, it'll be an 8.5. And so, that's kind of where we go from that scale. And that's just been something that's pretty helpful for me to know where those people are. And sometimes if it's a husband and a wife, they'll have different numbers. It's good to kind of see like where they're at from that. So that's kind of my, and there's a whole process I would say about showing homes and things that you can do. We could get real, nitty gritty for that kind of stuff. But as far as this call goes, like all that I see is really, a general overview from it is what I'm going through right now. And then, if we've got time at the end, of course, we can kind of ask questions and figure out like where y'all want to go specifics on it. But that's kind of where it's at, like on a general overview, right? And I kind of account for about when I'm setting up showings, as long as in their same general area, I set up for about 20 minutes per showing, and that includes drive time. So now if the homes are further apart, like maybe, you're showing acreage lots and, you're all over the town or whatever, I mean, you might account for longer, 30 to 45 to an hour between, each showing. And it also depends on the size of the house, right? Like if you're showing a 35 to 4,500 square foot house, like it's probably going to be a 30 to 40 minute showing versus, 15 to 1,800 square foot house. You can knock out, 3 of those an hour. So like, that's just the numbers that I've gotten in my head. So normally the way that I do it, at least here with setting up showings, with our scheduling service that we use in San Antonio, is like if I've got 3 showings, or let's just say I've got 5 showings, and they're going to start at 10 a.m. I set up my first showing for 10 a.m., second one for 10:15, third one for 10:30, and then my fourth one for 11 o'clock. I'll skip that 10:45 slot because usually, they're in hour brackets. So it's like 10 to 11, 10:15 to 11:15, 10:30 to 11:30, and then the next one I set from 11 to 12. And then 11:15 to 12:15. And that's kind of how I do my 5 showings. And usually I hit those brackets all the time. If I miss it, then I can call centralized showing and kind of adjust it. But for me, that seems to be the right way. And then I just tell the clients too, like I got to kind of sometimes keep them on track. Most of the time, I don't, like, it just kind of works out that that time frame works. But if like we're getting behind, or if I feel like, people are just spending way too long, like, I just tell them, hey, you guys, we got to go see this next one at this time, and we'll push them along a little bit. And that's kind of it. Like, that's how I actually go show the houses. As far as my process goes on that, let's see, of course I try and again, just get them to compare homes. I always ask, like, at the end of the day, like, don't go a day without asking, like, hey, are you ready to make an offer on one of these homes? Like, you've got to ask, you got to try and not like close them hard, but just, give them the opportunity to say yes, because there's times where that's all it takes, right? Like, to like push them over the edge is just asking. Whereas if you don't ask and you let them, go think about it or whatever, then, sometimes it's just hard for them to make a decision. Versus if you just ask while you're there, like, hey, like, here's the thing. I think that, this home was, the best one of the day. Are you comfortable making an offer? If I, go back, I'll do some comps for you on this property. And if everything falls in line with it, are you ready for me to drop the offer, and try and get that commitment? And then at that point, like I just mentioned, the next step of the process is, once you've identified one that they're ready to go, make an offer on, I always will go back home, because I tell people, like, hey, I'm a realtor, but I don't know literally every neighborhood's comps and what every home has sold for in the last 6 months. And so instead of trying to, because you'll get the question, people say, well, like, what do you think about the price? Is this a good price for the house? I just tell them straight up, like, hey, it might be, but what I prefer to do is go back and really spend 30 minutes, diving into the comps and, and getting you accurate information than just kind of like, telling you, yes, it is, or no, it's not. On a whim. And so, that's kind of it. And so I think people respect that. And I tell them, ahead of time, like, I don't, do all this due diligence, up front, because I never know which home you're really going to like. So I'm not going to invest 30 minutes to an hour, doing all the comps, before I go out and see a property. But once we've identified a property that you like, I have no problem spending as much time as it takes to make sure that we're making a fair offer on the property, and that you're getting, the best deal we can get you on it. And so that's kind of how I explain that part of it. And so then at that point, then I would go home, I would look up the comps, I would send them the comps, I would set up a phone call with them to discuss the comps and kind of what they mean. And, and hopefully you can do that over the phone with them. A lot of times, I'll just send them an email with, like, the MLS listings of all the homes that have sold in the last 6 months, of all the actives. And then, I tell them, hey, if you get on Zillow, and you pull up, just Google the addresses, even though they've been sold, you should still be able to see pictures of them, so you can compare pretty easily. And that way, I can have a pretty good discussion with them over the phone about, like, hey, this, based on these, I do see this as a good deal, or I don't see this as a good deal. I think that we would need to offer this to make it a good deal. And then we, just come to some clarity on that. And then, hey, so are you ready for me to drop that offer? A lot of times they'll say, yeah, let's do it. And then, you drop the offer, you submit it. And so that's kind of the whole process there to get an offer going. Let's see. Well, again, staying just as a general overview, the next part, let's just assume that the contract gets accepted, and now you're in the process of closing with them, or, of transaction, like the transaction process. The inspections, I'll help them coordinate them. And when I say I actually have a transaction manager that I pay per deal. And she's amazing. But, I basically pay her $350 per file. And if it closes, and she has this as part of her checklist, is to help coordinate the inspection. So, we've got a couple inspectors that we use that we'll recommend. If the buyer has their own, of course, we let them use that person. But if they don't, and they need some help coordinating it, we'll coordinate that for them. And I don't attend the inspections. And I just tell them up front, like, hey, you're welcome to go there and meet the inspector, but they can get into the inspection, they can get into the property themselves. And what I would recommend for you is to maybe coordinate that with the inspector of when you should go there. Because a lot of inspectors have their own process. They might not want you there for the first, hour to 2 hours, but maybe you're good to be there at the last 30 minutes. But just find out what works with that inspector, so you can show up and, ask questions or whatever you want to do with that inspector. But I do not attend those. Let's see. Closing, of course, I do show up for all my closings. I mean, unless there's just some emergency or something that I'm out of town or something that I can't be there, I always will show up for my closings. I think that's important for you to be there. So that's pretty much it. Like once you get under contract, I mean, what are you really meeting them for? Just, the closing, and that's really it that you've got to go do another in-person meeting for. Transaction management, all my clients get a weekly phone call, every single one of them, from my transaction manager. And then what I do is I won't say that I call my clients every single week, but I do get communication to them every single week. So that might be a text message, that might be, a Facebook message, that might be a phone call, that might be some random meeting. Maybe I'm just meeting them for coffee or lunch or something. But I do try and stay in touch with them. I do stay in touch with them every single week. It just might not be a phone call. They get a phone call for sure every week from my transaction manager. So that's kind of what I do there on that process. And you might be thinking like, man, as a transaction manager, is that worth paying $350 for per file? I'll tell you, that's the best investment I've ever made in my business. Doesn't matter if you're a new agent, doesn't matter if you're a seasoned agent. Like maybe you're like, well, I'm new. I've got, plenty of time to do this during the day. I'd rather do it myself. It's not even about that, in my opinion. I think it's great to look like you have like a team, right? Like you're going to look professional. Hey, this person is, an expert at what they do as far as handling the paperwork and the file. So even if you have a team, I think that it's still a benefit to use a transaction manager. But then too, like I say, it's just one of those things like you're not going to drop the ball. I would drop the ball constantly when I was trying to do my own transaction management. Now, sometimes that was because I'd have 5 to 10 files working at a time, but even still, that's one of the most important processes you do not want to drop the ball on is, that transaction management process. So anyway, so that you got that. And then you get to closing day. I bring a closing gift every single time. I use cutting boards. I got a guy that makes them for me out of St. Louis. And, it's a custom cutting board that says, welcome to, welcome home. And it has the person's name on it. It's great. I pay, I think like 60 or 70 bucks per cutting board. And it, clients love it. You bring that with you to your closing. And that's it. Then after that's done, after the closing's done, I add that person to my database. Like, I've already got them in my lead database, but then I put them in my closing database. I've got a different list for that where basically it's going to send people, they go on my send out cards list, meaning that they're going to start getting communication for their birthdays. They're going to start getting communication for the anniversary of when they close on their house. They're going to get, stuff for Christmas. They're going to get my monthly stuff that I'm sending out for like my letter of the heart and my evidence of success postcard. And we've talked about those things on different calls. I mean, that's why I'm kind of just going over them really quickly. But bottom line, I'm adding that person to a list that they're going to receive ongoing communication after the closing in the form of, usually it's going to be, like mail, like, postcards, or, if it's like their birthday, they're going to get a little package that has like, cookies or brownies. And, on Christmas, they're going to get a Christmas card. They're going to get invites to events whenever I host events, which, I host 2 events per year. We'll do a Christmas event. We'll do a summer event, and they're going to get invites to that. So I just add them to a different list. You want to make sure you don't forget your past clients, and that's it. So that's pretty much the whole process in a nutshell. I try to get that done in 30 minutes because now we got 30 minutes to try and, kind of talk about those different things in detail. I think that's definitely enough information to get the juices flowing at this point. But I also want to welcome. Yeah, thank you. I wanted to welcome to the call Curtis Dixon. That's probably the longest I've ever talked without my man Curtis stepping in and giving me some advice and feedback. But yeah, man, what do you think? What are some takeaways or things you want to contribute?
Good morning, Kyle. That was awesome, man. I second Trent's thoughts there in the chat, guys. And even if you've worked with dozens of buyer clients or maybe even, hundreds of buyer clients, that 30 minutes, Kyle, was the framework, man. That was a perfect overview of working with buyers from cradle to grave. Go back and watch that again and again, guys. I guarantee you can pick up a nugget or two just in, if nothing else, in the structure of that, right? This is a process. So working with real estate clients in general should be a process. And the more that you can stick to a framework and a schedule, and the more organized you are, you're demonstrating professionalism along the entire way. How comfortable would you be if you called up a doctor's office and they said, yeah, no problem. We'll come out to your house and see you. Like, wait, what? That's not the process I'm used to. That's not what I expect. Or you walked into a doctor's office and the doctor just started, poking you with needles without asking you any questions or seeing if you're sick or what you're there for, right? Like the same thing can be said about this real estate process. Dude, Kyle, and you nailed it. So a couple things I want to fill in. Let me make sure there's no big questions in the chat. So that was some good stuff. I was taking notes, dude, while you're talking, and I just wanted to highlight and drill down in a couple of areas to provide some strategies that you can take the framework that Kyle just laid out, and you can guarantee if you're already doing that you can increase your sales if you follow a couple of these tips. And if you're not yet doing what Kyle has laid out, I implore you to put that in place first. And then again, take a couple of these ideas and add them in. So I'm going to give you what I'd say are 7 different things you could do, 7 different ways that you can increase your conversion when working with buyers along the process that Kyle's already laid out. So I'm going to give you one when you're on the phone with that buyer client or prospective buyer client. So like Kyle said, we've talked all about lead generation before. So let's assume you're already on the phone with a willing and possibly able buyer. I'm going to give you one question that is what I call a transition question. And this transition question is going to increase the amount of times that you actually successfully set up that buyer appointment that Kyle was talking about, that buyer presentation appointment, which we're all questing after. If you're on the phone with a buyer, that should be the goal of your phone call, not to explain everything over the phone, not to sell over the phone, none of that. The goal is to set that appointment, right? So here's the question. You've been going through talking about where they're searching and you're getting information. You're asking, like Kyle said, if they're open to talking to a lender. That's all good stuff. That's what you want. So here's how you're going to transition the conversation to actually set the appointment. Hey, Kyle, one last question here before I let you go. How much do you actually know about the process of buying a home? Man. That's your transition question.
Do you want me to role play with you, or you just hypothetical?
Now, just hypothetical.
Okay,
just wanted to use your name, man. Good to see you. I see your smiling face. Good to see everybody on here. But when you ask that question, even if they're experienced, you can still help, right? You're the professional. So it's establishing you as the expert. How much do you know about the process? Awesome. Well, here's what I'd like to do. I want to sit down with you in person so we can go over that thing from start to finish. I want to talk about your past experiences if you're an experienced buyer. If you're an inexperienced buyer, I want to talk about the entire process, right? So that question will increase your ability to set appointments. That's on the phone. Now, let's get to that buyer's appointment. And I'm gonna highlight something I heard Kyle already talking about, but I love this so much, and it is so powerful in today's supply and demand, economy with the lack of inventory. This is super important that I want to highlight it and to drill down a little bit further. And it's a conversation, it's an expectation conversation that you're going to have during that buyer presentation. And it's about 9s and 10s. So I heard Kyle talk about that script, but here's where you actually introduce that concept and idea. It's at the buyer presentation. So we're talking about the market. We're talking about low inventory. We're talking about pricing. And I'm going to say something like, hey, Kyle, before we ever get out there and look at homes, man, I just want to reiterate and remind you what we're looking for when we're out there. We're looking for 9s and 10s. And here's what I mean by that. Every time we go to a house, we're going to rate this house on a scale of 1 to 10. And when I say we're, I just really mean you and your wife, you and your husband, you and your partner. You're going to rate every single house we see. And I don't take offense because I didn't build any of these houses. I just want your honest rating every time. And here's what we're looking for, Kyle. When you rate something a 9, we're going to make an offer on that house because there are not a lot of 9s. And if it's a 9 for you in the city of San Antonio, it's a 9 for somebody else. So we're going to offer and try and win that thing. If it's a 6, 7, or 8, we're not going to offer. We're going to talk about it. We're going to think about it. You're going to go home and decide what would make it a 9. You're going to go home and decide why was it a 6 for you but a 7 for your husband, right? That's what we're going to talk about when it's a 6, 7, and 8. But 9s and 10s, we're going to offer on. Now, that's a very important script during the buyer presentation because it's going to help you when we get to tip number 3. Tip number 3 is, Kyle's a pro. He's worked with thousands, I'm guessing, of buyers, right? So if you haven't worked with thousands and you don't have it all up here, you need a tool. So you need to carry what I call a rating sheet. So Kyle said he has every single buyer rate homes. I bring a sheet of paper with a little scale of 1 to 10 and a blank for them to fill in the address. And additionally, I ask them 2 things they like and 2 things they don't like about every single house. Here's why I do this. Not necessarily just to get the rating, but it's to establish, again, who's leading this process, right? So at the end of each house, I'm going to hand them that sheet and say, hey, don't forget to rate this. I want you guys to stand here at the counter, rate it on a scale of 1 to 10, write your stuff down. Then we're going to review that thing so they get used to talking about every single house openly and honestly. And so that you can hear why this house was a 7, why this house was an 8. And you're going to bring that back in later when you find a house that has those qualities they're looking for and they think it's an 8, and you remind them and all of a sudden it's a 9. So you carry that rating sheet with you. And then as soon as you hear that it's a 9 or it's an 8, you can start talking about the offer. So that rating sheet, super powerful tool. Then the next few more things here. Another one, and Kyle talked about this, I have a little bit different perspective on it for newer agents or for agents that don't do 15, 20, 30, 40 transactions a year. And it's about the research. So Kyle gave his example of, and you guys probably can gather, how Kyle operates his business because of what he has going on. It's all about time efficiency, right? So he's going to show 3 to 5 houses. He's going to show them in 15-minute increments. He's going to run a 30-minute buyer presentation. For some of you, you need to dedicate as much time as you can to learning the market, helping that buyer. And here's a way to do that, doing the CMA in advance of showings. So I actually encourage a lot of new agents, before you show properties, once you schedule that tour of 3 to 5, do the CMAs in advance as if you were going to offer on that property. Spend 30 or 45 minutes and actually don't only bring the MLS listing sheet, bring the CMA for every single house. And here's what this does, even if they're not ready to buy that house, it instills confidence in that buyer that you are the right agent. They're out with the right person because this person did an hour. They don't know it takes an hour. They could think it takes 6 hours. They did all this legwork and research before coming out with me. What a professional. Every question I had, they had an answer. Dollar per square foot. How's this market selling? Is this a great place to be? You've done all that research and you bring that CMA. I guarantee you that will win you a client that you might have missed an opportunity to win because you hadn't done that preparation. So do the CMA in advance. That's during the showings, right? So you bring those CMAs with you. Last couple of pieces. The next one is very important for actually helping people make that offer. And that is knowing your real estate math. So important because when they find a house that they like, even before they tell you, they're thinking about an offer. They're like, okay, what would we offer? How would this work? What would happen if we won this house, right? Once they can see themselves in a house, now they're worried about the math. They're worried about basically 3 things. The payment, they're worried about the closing costs, and they're worried about how much cash it's going to cost them right now. Almost everybody knows their bank account balance, right? And they need to know, if I were to buy this house and make this offer, how much is it going to cost me in the next couple of days? You talked about that inspection thing. You talked about that appraisal. When is that due? You talked about the earnest money, the option money, right? So every time you're gearing somebody up for an offer, you need to know the math. You need to know what the payment would be at this price range, what the closing costs would be. And that, again, requires preparation. That requires a good understanding of the process. That requires a good dialogue with your lender. But the more you know that math, the more likely you are to be able to help them make that offer when they're feeling inclined. And then here's the last thing you can do to push them over the edge with that offer. You can remove the fear, because the biggest thing that holds a buyer back from actually making an offer is they're scared. They're just afraid. If they're new, first-time buyer, they don't know what's going to happen next. If they're an experienced buyer, they're wondering if there's a cheaper house around the corner or a house they might like better, or maybe they should wait, right? So what I've found, most of the time, most of the time, not always, but most of the time, it's around money. They're just afraid of how much it's going to cost. They're afraid of losing money. Everybody's worked so hard to make their money. They don't want to blow it and make a mistake with their money, right? So the easiest way to remove fear to making an offer, in my opinion, is to talk about what I call the cost to offer. Now, in most markets, if you guys have the buyer protection option period in your sales contracts, your purchase contracts, that is the cost of an offer. It's whatever the cost of that option period is. So what I talk about when they're getting ready to offer, they're thinking about it, I'll just say something like, hey guys, I know you guys have rated this an 8.5 or 9. You're going to go back and talk about it. We're going to do that research like we talked about. I'm going to go check some numbers and give you a recommendation on what we should offer. But I just want to talk to you about something real quick. I want to talk to you about the worst case scenario of making an offer. The worst case scenario if we make this offer is they accept it on the spot, and we owe $100 of option money. That's the worst case scenario. Yes, we also owe that $1,200 of earnest money, but that $1,200 we won't lose. I will not let us lose that money, but we might spend $100 to make sure we want this house. That's the cost to offer. Let's not think about it. Do you have a $100 bill? I bet you have one in your wallet. Let's make this offer and let's get this thing under contract. Because if we don't, remember, if it's a 9 for you, it's a 9 for someone else, and they're going to come in and buy this house after we leave. So that's the cost to offer. And then one little question. I love this phrase. Learned this from a mentor of mine. He asks this question all the time. It's the coolest little one question script you can ask to, again, reestablish your authority and position you as the expert before you're about to tell them whatever you're going to tell them. And that question is, are you open to professional advice? Because you remind them you're a professional, you ask for permission, and then you're about to deliver something that's going to influence them to make a decision. The best time to ask that is when you come back to recommend the price they should offer. Hey, Kyle, I've went and done that research, man. We talked about it. I know you and your wife are thinking about it. Real quick, is it still a 9 on a scale of 1 to 10? Awesome. Okay, so let's talk about the offer real quick. Before I go there, are you guys open to some professional advice? Yes, you are? Awesome. Well, let me tell you what I found in my research, and here's what we should offer. So there's 7 ways you can increase your buyer sales, just fills in a couple of gaps in the areas that Kyle was talking, drills down deeper in some of those areas. Hopefully that was helpful.
Dude, that was awesome, man. I think we're like competing, Curtis, like who's providing more value, you know, like you versus me, like hopefully.
Gas pedal and steering wheel, baby. That's why we do this thing together, guys. Just keep coming and we'll keep it coming.
That's it, guys. I love it. So cool. So we've had a few questions in the chat. I've been trying to respond to them just by typing it out. But, you know, if we want to, just hit it on here as well so people watching the recordings can kind of understand what people are asking about too. But some of the stuff about, you know, how to go about finding a transaction coordinator. Some people had questions about transaction coordination and that kind of thing. I think truly, like, I mean, my story is a little bit different because I trained up my transaction manager. She used to be my actual assistant before, you know, starting her own business in transaction management specifically. And so now I still use her. And so it's a little bit different. But what I would say if I were, you know, an agent just like looking around how to find one is you got to connect with other agents and find out who they're using, you know, and typically it's going to be bigger agents, right? Like, you know, I don't know if the average agent uses a transaction manager. Like I said, I think everybody should, but find out who's doing, you know, business in your area, you know, 30, 40 deals a year at least. Because those are going to be the people that normally will go out and get a transaction manager. You know, people doing 60, 70, 80 deals, they've got to have some leverage. And usually a transaction manager is the first potential outsourcing. And so find out who they're using, get about 2-3 names if you can, call them up, find out what they do, find out who you know, like the personality type of, because they're going to be ideally talking to your clients. You know, most of them do speak to your clients, you know, on a weekly basis. You want somebody that, you know, reflects your style and your approach, you know, similar to what you would do. And like I will say, because I used a transaction manager before we had Heather. Now I won't name names, but that person is a little bit different style than what my style is. You know, they're a little bold and brash. I don't know if like that's the right word, but rough. Yeah, they were rough. Like, I mean, they got the job done. Like, and I mean, sometimes maybe that was necessary to like, you know, to get stuff, because sometimes the transaction management process isn't always just, you know, so simple. Like you've got to do things, but it was more rough than what I would have wanted. Right. So like, those are things you're going to look for. You're going to want to look for experience. Like, don't, you know, just hire somebody that's brand new at transaction management. I mean, this is something that the more experience they have, the better they're going to know about different types of things that come up in a transaction without having to call you and, you know, ask you about it or whatever. Like if they've seen hundreds or, you know, they're doing this for multiple agents, chances are, you know, if a scenario comes up in the, you know, midst of your transaction, you know, they've seen it before, right? So they know how to handle it, which that experience is invaluable, because chances are, and that's the other thing why I think it's even important for new agents to do this, you know, get a transaction manager, is you haven't seen every experience. So like when you get a situation that arises, I mean, yeah, you can ask your broker. Yeah, you can ask, you know, fellow realtors and things like that. But if your transaction manager is competent and they're very good at what they do, and ideally, of course, you know, that also goes into the point that you want to have a licensed transaction manager. They've got to have their real estate license.
Big point.
But yeah, it's a huge point right there. So make sure that that's part of your interviewing question right there. But if they've experienced a lot of transactions, they're going to be invaluable to making sure that, you are giving the best service, that you're not forgetting a scenario that, might be, because I'm not saying that they're going to make the decisions for you, but if they've seen everything, you can actually, there might be like, I still have questions where like, I don't know, what have you seen before? And I'll ask my transaction manager that, and she'll say, well, like I actually had this deal with, such and such agent, and, this is how, we handled it. I'm like, all right, well, that sounds good. You know what I mean? And I'll go with that. And that's the type of stuff that, $300 to $350 a file that you're paying. It's invaluable if you can get that service back out of it. And so anyway, so that's, I think a good amount of stuff to look for a transaction coordinator. Anything I missed, Curtis?
No, I just want to hammer home your point, because I know there's a wide variety of agent experiences that jump on this call, right? You might sell a lot of houses, you might have been around for a lot of years, or you might be brand new and just getting going. I want to reiterate with Kyle, like, it is, transaction managers and coordinators are not just for the experienced, super busy agent. They, to me, are the absolute number one best potential partner for a newer agent as well, because you are paying for their level of expertise. And so the average, some of the biggest mistakes for newer agents come with regards to not knowing what to think about proactively and not knowing what to be looking for, right? So you get this hint, the lender hasn't replied in a few days, or the buyer didn't turn in their checks on time. Like, you're not sure to check all that stuff, or, you're worried about appraisal and you don't know what you need to do, and it's not back and it's a few days before closing. You're not thinking proactively about what you need to do, but that good transaction manager is. So again, to reiterate, it is 100% worth the investment. Even if it's your first deal, spending a few $100 is really, really worth it, because you might get 5 or 6 deals worth of experience by talking to that manager, and you might save a deal that would blow up if you didn't have that support. So super duper worth it. And then the other thing, like Kyle said, the bottom line of what you need to be looking for is somebody that really blows you away, that you think is fantastic. When you meet them and talk to them, they demonstrate their expertise. They've done lots of transactions. They have a high level of experience, because there are a lot of agents out there that end up doing transaction management in lieu of selling, because they're not selling a lot and they decide like, oh, I'm going to do some transaction management. That's not exactly who you want. You want the person who is a professional transaction manager and have done hundreds of transactions. That's who you want in your corner. So absolutely right.
I love it. And then real quick, guys, I want to, just talk about this, because I think this is kind of cool. This is not necessarily specific to the buyer process, but it kind of answers Trent's question. He asked about if they can get a copy of my packet. One thing I'll say, again, anybody on these live feeds, this is always going to be free, the Monday Mastermind, the Tuesday Mastermind. And if you want a copy of my packet, put your email in the chat right now, and I'm happy to email you over a copy of like what I talked about earlier. But then also something I do want to point out, and is I mentioned this on the Facebook Live when I was talking about, jumping on this Monday Mastermind for this morning, is I did just set up a Patreon page. And I don't know if anybody's familiar with that or what that is, but basically if you go there, the way that I have it set up now is that you can actually access all of the prior recordings of the Monday Mastermind. So, I think I've already got about 30 or 40 episodes on there on my Patreon page. And you can just go to Patreon, patreon.com/Kyle Handy, all one word. And if you go there, you can have, I think there's like 50 hours worth of our past Monday Masterminds on there that you can, subscribe to, and you're going to get all the past recordings. And whenever we record these on Mondays, I'm going to put the recording onto that platform in the afternoon. So like all the Monday Masterminds, the new ones will be there. And so you basically subscribe. I think it's like $4.98 a month for it. So it's very cheap. And most of that, goes to pay for the platform. The biggest thing was, and the reason why I'm doing that is because, on my YouTube channel, I really don't want to have these videos on my YouTube, my public facing YouTube. I'm going to kind of create some more professional looking videos for YouTube. Whereas these are kind of raw and rough, but I want these to be out there and I want them to be organized for people. And so Patreon just gives me a way where I can kind of separate these from the other training that I do on Tuesdays, but it's still going to be available where you can go back and watch, rewatch these. Like Curtis said, if you want to go rewatch the first 30 minutes of this, you can go in there and watch it as many times. You can go back to our old ones. And then whenever we do these on an ongoing basis, you'll have access to them as well. And so I got it set up to where you can subscribe just to the Monday Masterminds or just the Tuesday Masterminds, or if you want, you can subscribe to both. And so I hope that, again, price-wise, I'm not trying to make money off it. I'm really kind of paying my costs and all that stuff. So hopefully it's affordable to everybody, and it's an organized way. I tag things. So like whatever we're talking about that day, you should be able to see, like, go with whatever tag you want. Like if it's, wanting to learn all about buyers, you can click the buyer tag and it's going to pull you up all of the different past recordings that we've done for the buyers. So it took me a long time to set this up. I'd say the last week solid, I was setting all of these up for Monday and for Tuesday's masterminds. So go in there. I think there's already about 100 hours of content for our Tuesday mastermind. So lots of stuff, and I'm going to be constantly adding stuff in there. And I'm putting bonus trainings in there. So beyond just our Monday and Tuesday recordings, I'm actually, whenever there's content that I create that maybe isn't meant for like my public facing YouTube channel, but I still think it's like good information. Like it might just be me sitting at a desk, like filling out a buyer's representation agreement and how you can actually fill in the blanks. Like that kind of stuff I'm not going to put on YouTube, but it might be helpful to some people. And so I'm putting that kind of stuff in there just because, again, like it's just a way for me to put the stuff out there, get it to you guys, but not necessarily have to be like professionally edited. It's kind of just the raw stuff, but it definitely is going to be helpful information, I think. So anyways, guys, I got a lot of emails in there. I definitely will send over all of that stuff to you guys. And again, if you're watching this later on and you weren't able to put your email in there, if you do put it, subscribe to the Patreon page, I do put links to any kind of like material and stuff like that in those Patreon descriptions. So you'll be able to download this later on at that point too. So cool, guys. Well, we got a lot of stuff in there. I don't see any other questions, but before we end the call, I definitely want to ask if there was any other questions that, we didn't cover. I'm looking back onto Facebook right now. Looks like we're good.
If you don't have questions, guys, whenever we open up the chat near the end of these or anytime you come into, the other thing I'd love to see as we continue to do this is I'd love if you have a success story that ties back to these masterminds. Will you drop it in here in the chat? Because, Kyle and I do as much as we can to share and promote the event and the topics. And, we know and believe they're helpful, but the coolest stories are the ones that we hear from other folks outside of this mastermind talking about, man, that listing stuff you guys did, I went and nailed a listing appointment, or that buyer stuff you guys did. Anytime you have a little win or a little success story and you want to give a little tip of the hat to something you heard here from somebody, not just one of us, we'd love to hear that story in the chat as well. So anytime you have that, drop some success stories in there.
I love it. Yeah. And thanks, Jerome, for posting that link. Yeah. I appreciate you putting the link in there for the Patreon page. And, by the way, I do want to give a shout out to some of the most recent. I just saw these people already subscribed: Norma, Steven, Raj, Michael. Thank you guys for joining in on that. Like I say, I always try and provide as much value as I can. I know Curtis is constantly providing value. And Curtis, I don't know if there was anything you wanted to promote. I know last year your training. So maybe if you've got something you want to talk about.
Yeah, same thing, man. So guys, one of the biggest trainings that you can come find me doing right now every single week is on Tuesdays at 11 a.m. Central Time, 9 a.m. Pacific. If you're with our brokerage EXP, then you have access to it. It's in EXP World in our cloud office in the Agent Experience University Auditorium, or the EXP University Auditorium. And it is the Database Fundamentals class. So the way the class is working, it's pretty similar to this style, where every single week I have a topic related to the fundamentals of building and managing and leveraging your database. And you're going to come in there and you're going to get some good database nuggets, process, topics, sequence, strategies, tactics, tips, all that good stuff every single week. So what I say is, regardless of the size of your database, you should be able to get something out of it, because I'll be talking about the different stages and how things apply at those stages. So every Tuesday, 11 a.m. Central, 9 a.m. Pacific. If you're not with our brokerage, then just find and message me and I'll get you an invitation to that training.
I love it. Very cool. All right. So I'm reading a comment from Raul. Listing appointment yesterday, pretty much did everything you touched on, basically statistics of the areas, schools area, days on market, what was sold previously, etc. Mario and I went together, and just about the first 10 minutes, they get super comfortable, and we were already talking about the Spurs season with no worries. Shout out to y'all and to Mario.
Awesome.
I love it, man. Love the success stories, guys. Yeah, we talked about listing appointments a little bit ago. So yeah, that was one of our past trainings. So yeah, we're always, and the other thing I want to share, guys, I actually had somebody email me the other day, and you know, and he was kind of telling me like, hey, you know, like some of the trainings that I, you know, I like he was giving me feedback. He's like, you know, some of the trainings that, you know, you guys do, you know, I really like, but, you know, I'd like to see, you know, maybe you talk a little bit about this. And that's, he actually talked about the and so that gave me my topic for today. He asked me about,
Awesome.
you know, he was a, you know, new agent, you know, seems like we're talking about a lot of listings, but he was just getting buyers, and like, and that's what he was working on in the beginning. So that's what gave me my idea, guys. So one of the things I'll share with you guys is reach out. Like if there's something you want to hear about, or maybe you want more information about, like I don't have this set as like a schedule every week. Like this is what we're talking about. Like I literally am just, you know, talking about what I feel passionate about, what I think, you know, agents want to hear or need to hear. And if I've got, you know, people requesting something, like that definitely gives me some juice to do it. And then the other thing too, is if I've already talked about it, you know, if I can link you to, you know, something that we'd already done, then of course, then I'll just do that. But a lot of times now, because we're just starting this, I mean, 2 months is nothing. I think there's so much information that we can share. So like if you've got stuff, I mean, that's the best way to get, you know, your topic talked about or to learn in something that you need to learn about. So cool, guys. Well, again, and if you need to get a hold of me, you know, you can email me, Kyle, Kyle, at thehandyteam.com. Or you can reach out to me on any of the social media platforms. Facebook, you find me on there, just Kyle Handy. Instagram, Real Kyle Handy. And I don't think I'd given an update from the last time, but I wanted to thank everybody for going out there and following me. I was just under 10,000 followers, and I had hit over 10,000 followers that day. And now I think I'm at 10,157 followers. So y'all, you keep doing that. I really appreciate that. You know, and my goal is to always put one post a day. I'm going to start providing more real estate stuff on there. I put a lot of stuff about my family, and, you know, I know that was what I was using it for in the beginning, but now as I'm starting to get more of a following behind in the real estate industry, you know, I'm going to try and start, you know, adding value in that platform as well. But anyways, guys, thanks everybody for jumping on the call today. And, you know, we'll see everybody on here either next week for the next Monday Mastermind for sales calls or sales training, or if you are an EXP agent and you want to hop on our Agent Attraction Tuesday Mastermind, you're welcome to do that. Same thing, thetuesdaymastermind.com, 9 a.m. Central Time on Tuesday. We talk all about, you know, building your team. You know, we talk about leadership. You know, we talk about a lot of things that, you know, kind of go along with our business model at EXP. You know, in the revenue share model. So those are just the 2 calls that we're doing every single week. And again, both of them are available on the Patreon page as far as recordings and for future. But if there's anything you ever need, feel free to reach out to me directly. And we just love to help out however we can. So thanks, Curtis, for jumping on this with me, man. And we'll talk soon.
Thanks, everybody. My pleasure, Kyle. Have a good Monday, guys.
See you guys.
Bye.